Thanks, Steve, for setting this up with Tim. So Tim has been a mentor and inspiration to me in interpretation for probably 25 years easily, I think. Something
roughly
like
that.
Yeah. I first got an interpretation in Boulder, Colorado in 1986 was the first time I was trained, and not too long after that I got involved as a member of the National Association of Interpretation, and Tim was the executive director there for how many years? 17, almost 20. 17 years. He loves Hawaii, so him and Lisa, his wife, retired here, so they have a place down in South Kona. And it's an honor to have him here. He's a world-class interpreter, and I'm really excited for you to be here and speak with us.
Well, thank you. What a pleasure to be here. You really work for one of my favorite organizations in the world, and when I say the world, Lisa and I had the good fortune to travel and train 24 countries. And we trained about roughly 1,000 interpretive trainers, certified interpretive trainers for NAI. And now the Certified Interpretive Guide program, which, is there anyone who's a certified interpretive guide? 2, 3. Roughly 40,000 certified interpretive guides around the world in 44 countries. We were kind of shocked when we left NAI in 2012. We did a little research, and you kind of lose track of how many people you've talked to. I'm sure like you have clients go through your hands every day, and if someone asked you how many people did you talk to in the last year, it's a big number. We were shocked to find out how many people it was. And one of the reasons we got into it was because a tour company in Alaska said to me in 1999, they attended a training thing I was doing in Seattle. A guy named Dominic Canali, who was with Denali Aramark Tours, said, I've got 85 bus driver guides. And he says, there's a real danger that they'll do a great job driving the bus and they'll bore everybody silly by talking too much or by not talking enough or by just being interested in what they're interested in. And he said, we really need some sort of baseline training that makes sense. And so that's what led us into creating the Certified Interpretive Guide. But I'm here to talk about interpretation in general for a little over an hour. And let me first invite you to ask questions anytime you have them. Don't wait for anything in particular. And hopefully it'll be a conversation. Because my first question for you would be, if I can learn to manipulate the paper. How many of you have been guiding more than 10 years? 3, okay. More than 5 years? Another one? More than a year? Okay, cool. How many of you think you could get better? I always hope every hand goes up, because one of the things that's there's 2 real dangers with being a guide in Hawaii. One of them is that some people are naturals. We're good at talking to people. Talking story is something we talk about in Hawaii, but I was the child whose dad was a salesman, and I would go on the road with him and stand and hold on to his pant leg and listen to him tell story after story and ask questions of customers and engage them in conversations, and then sell them lawnmowers, of all things. And he wanted me to do that the rest of my life. And at age 18, I hurt his feelings by saying, I really don't want to be a lawnmower salesman. But I'm really aware that there's a tendency, if you're naturally good at talking to people and making that connection with them individually, that that alone will make you seem to be a great guide. I'm aware also that our resource here is so dazzling for someone from the center of Kansas that they can come here and have what I would call a really mediocre experience and go home and show everybody the photos and rave about how great everything was, because they saw an ocean, they saw dolphins, they saw beautiful trees, they saw great mountains, they saw hula perform behind hula he'e and thought it was spectacular, and everything's new. Everything's wonderful. So part of the danger is that we can get away with being okay, and people have a great experience. I know that I've known Rob long enough to know that the emphasis here is not on quantity of people or amount of money, although those are still things we have to measure, but it's on the quality of the experience and what happens out there with people. And I know that you have your mission right at the top of your website, and if I could find my notes, our mission is to share the splendor of Hawaii Nei and inspire deep connection with our natural world. I want to ask you, first of all, what do you hope happens if you're successful doing a tour? What's the result of that with your customer, your client? Okay, satisfaction? Connection with the resource and with the guide?
Well, yeah, with the guide if you can do that, but it's more important that they get a relationship with the island. How pretty it is, unique aspects of it.
Okay. I think that's great.
I hope that they learn something, and not just learn something, but be excited about that. I always feel like people go on in their eyes, be excited about the cool stuff they're seeing and learning about.
I like to charge them with the purpose.
I'm sorry?
That they're excited enough about what they're seeing and they've connected, and then they can go forward with some purpose.
Okay. What else?
I like to have them think about, at the end of the day, think about things in a new way.
I want them to care about taking care of this item, the environment in general, each other.
See the place that they're going back to in a different way because they saw this so deeply realized that they didn't see.
See their home anew due to what happened here. It's a great list. I have a question for you. Can you change people?
No.
That's the right answer. Okay, I like that. It's really interesting because when you ask young people who get into this field, can you change people? They always go, oh yeah, you can change people. No, you can't. You can waterboard them. You can put them in handcuffs and flog them. They still may do what they want to do, or they'll lie to you and tell you what you want to hear, and then they'll do what they want to do. We don't change people. If we're really, really good, we influence attitudes. And when people's attitudes are influenced, they eventually change their beliefs. And if they change their beliefs, they change their own behavior. I always like the saying, if you try to change someone else, think of how hard it is to change yourself. I don't know about you, but as a young person, I was a smoker, and quitting smoking was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. I also, some point early in my career, decided to quit using swear words and the F word and all that sort of thing, and I'm still working on that. So maybe some things just aren't easy to change. But we spend our life trying to change ourselves. So when you want to change someone else, you have to think about influence. I want to introduce a few concepts and talk about them. You've obviously touched on all of them already. I mean, if I was going to write a script for what you should say, you said it. These are great answers. How are you going to know that you did these things? What will people do differently if you do these?
It's hard to know because they leave you at the end of the truck to get out of the van. You have like that brief window to like see maybe you had an influence, but maybe if they come back.
Okay, they might come back. They might schedule another trip, and you may not be able to track that easily because it may be years later, and they may book it an entirely different way and all of that. But yeah, what else?
They line up. I don't know how else to explain it. They just change their expression.
I'm always going to go for how you measure that. What does a lit up person do?
They'll just go from kind of sitting there and absorbing things to
What do they do next? What do they do that you could
ask questions.
Okay, they ask questions. For me, that's always a measure of my success. If I can't get anybody to ask any questions, they've got a new term for this in National Park Service, and I get a kick out of it. Dialogic audience interaction. Sound like Park Service for those of you who know Park Service? Oh yeah. I mean, I find it amusing because I've been doing training in this field for 50 years. I'm 73 years old. I've been around a while. And I can tell you that we've been teaching people to ask questions of their guests, their clients, all of that 50 years. And now it's got a name, dialogic audience interaction. How cool. And we're teaching it like it's something new. And that's okay. I understand. I used to be a Fed. I worked at Land Between the Lakes in Kentucky as a manager of research and innovations, and we had what we call Fruit of the Month, which was whatever the new set of terminology that came along. You know, it was process improvement and that sort of thing. But it's still a righteous thing. If you ask questions, why? Why should you ask questions? You're curious. Why? But what do you, when you ask questions of your audience, why are you asking them?
Trying to get them to think about it beyond the question asked. We're trying to get them to ask more questions in their own mind before you even get to it, so that they're more receptive to whatever you might say next.
I'd say absolutely, because you know what? We've all done this. You can sit in any audience in the world and nod and seem to be interested. You're thinking about, you're wondering whether you left the hose on in your yard back home. You're wondering whether your spouse is, you forgot to call them. There's just a myriad things that can be going right or wrong in your lives that you can think about other than whatever is happening. And people ruin their own tours. Have you had that happen? They dress wrong, they come with the wrong attitude. What else could they do wrong? Pardon me? Yeah. I took a picture the other day in front of Coffee Shack. You know, everybody sitting there waiting to get in and get seated, but had their phone and was looking at it. And you're sitting there with your family instead of talking to them. You're texting your brother-in-law in Omaha or whatever. I don't know. It's crazy, but people change their own experience, and so you have to be aware of that. They're continually looking for ways to alter what they're doing while you're trying to do the right thing. Well, I want to talk about a few concepts that I hope, and then come back to this when we end. And if I could ask whoever's appropriate, Steve or Dan or somebody, give me a 5-minute warning when we're just, that'd be great. How many of you have seen this model before? It's called the social marketing model. And what it does is it points out that people come to us at all different levels of sophistication with where they are and what they're doing. Some people are just curious. They've never been here before. They got off the cruise boat and they signed up for this or that or whatever. You know, they're going to get back on the cruise boat and go to the next island or go to Hilo or whatever. Some come with some awareness. They did a lot of research. They read up on where they are. Their family or friends have been there. They have a interest already. Some have been back multiple times. They have some understanding of where they are and what stories lie here and why it's a different place. And they came back because they had some belief in it being different. Some already care about the place. If you care about a place, do you care for it? I like your answer, and I'll tell you why. I hope so is a great answer, but no is not a bad answer, and I'll tell you why. When they first started asking people in the early 1970s, are you an environmentalist? They used something called the Roper polls, and 90% of Americans said no, I'm not an environmentalist. 1980, I moved to Pueblo, Colorado to run a private nonprofit nature center, and the most common bumper sticker in town was out of work and hungry, eat an environmentalist. Steel mills had lost 5,000 jobs. Pueblo Army Depot had lost 5,000 jobs. Environmentalists were the reason. They wanted clean air and clean water and all that disgusting crap. It was really strange to be vilified for kind of thinking that a clean environment would be a good thing. But when we think of where people are at, the Roper polls found 90% said I'm not environmentalist. When they went back and did this again after 2000, 90% said they are environmentalist. But guess what? When they do these polls, they don't just ask that one question. They ask you, do you recycle at home? Did you buy your house based on its energy efficiency? Did you buy your car based on its gas efficiency? And the answer was only about 30% of the people that said they were environmentalists actually demonstrate anything that would suggest they've changed their behavior. So care about is as a step. It's a good one. We like to get people here, but care for stewardship is a portal that it's hard to get people to go through. It's easy to want them to go through, but it's hard to actually get them to change their behavior. Oh, I'm glad you asked. DA is not district attorney. It's dragged along. Have you had any of those on a tour?
Yeah.
It's every tour, isn't it? Yeah, it's a supportive spouse. I didn't want to go look at birds, but she's crazy about birds, so I'm here to. Well, you know what? For me, they were always my barometer. They were who I wanted to look at and say, can I interest that person? Can I get them to ask a question? Can I get them to want to look? Yeah. How cool is that? So at any rate, this process has been used for perhaps hundreds of years, but at least formally in the last 50 years as social marketing. And you know the health industry uses it a lot. They're trying to get us to quit smoking, lose weight, exercise, do all sorts of behavioral changes that might make us live longer and take better care of our bodies so that we're not in the back of the ambulance with them. And in the conservation movement, have any of you ever read Interpreting Our Heritage, the Freeman Tilton book? He said through interpretation, understanding, through understanding, appreciation, through appreciation, protection. I'll take you back through that. Through interpretation, understanding. Through understanding, appreciation, care about. Through appreciation, protection, care for. He wrote that book in 1954, and he wrote it by being driven around by a young National Park Service ranger interpreter and visiting parks and going to interpretive programs. And they said, tell us what this is that we do. We've been doing it since 1917 or 18, but we're not exactly sure what we think it is. And he wrote the first principles of interpretation. And this is not in his book per se. He didn't write this model, but he did write that quote, through interpretation, understanding, through understanding, appreciation through appreciation protection. And he pulled that out of a National Park Service document that had no attribution for who came up with it. And he said that. He said, it's not my words, but he says, I think it's right. I think it's what we do. So how do you, if in one sprinter you've got how many people? 14? Where are they on this? Yeah, they're all over the place. Maybe in the same family you've got this. You've got all of that. How do you design an experience that honors where they all are? How do you do that?
You have to spend the time getting to know each person.
Yeah.
Talk to each person at that level.
What are the first kinds of questions you ask?
Icebreaker kind of stuff.
Like,
Where are you from? What's your favorite toy? I ask people, why are you here today? What is it that you want out of this experience?
great questions.
People say, well, my wife made me come along, but I was a kid, so I could play with.
Yeah, and you know, when you listen, listening is hard because it's real easy when you're meeting 14 new people in 5 minutes. I'm aware sometimes someone gives me their name and 5 minutes later, what was their name? And part of that's my age, but part of it's just that you've got to be listening, active listening. And when you ask those questions, ideally you start thinking about, well, what's going to make this special for that person? And ideally you start listening for the overlaps with your life. And you can sometimes say, oh wow, you're from San Antonio. I've been there on the Riverwalk. It's a beautiful place. Colorado River's pretty wild. It can turn into a monster flooding thing, can't it? And you have the conversation, and you're starting to make connections that you wouldn't have made if you just talked to them. Too many tours are talking heads. I went to Alaska, and I was going on a kayak tour on Blackstone Bay, which is glaciers, and it's cold, and it's beautiful. And we had a bus ride from Anchorage down to Blackstone Bay, which I think is my recollection about an hour and a half. Someone knows, tell me if I'm wrong, but fairly long. The bus driver had the microphone on, he had the lavalier mic, and he talked for 90 minutes nonstop. And when he couldn't think of anything to say, he would say, and on your right is a Sitka spruce, and another Sitka spruce. And Lisa and I were both going, oh, I'm going to kill him. You know, stop me now, because this is not something I can take for an hour and a half. Well, that gets at another issue, and I don't know whether you've ever used these particular terms or not. What are demographics?
Different categories of people.
Yeah. How do we categorize them as demographics?
I mean, there's a lot of different ways to do it.
Okay, but what are some of the typical ones? Age. Are all people that are 16 or 50 have the same interests?
Usually not, sometimes.
Demographics are often used in marketing because we'll talk about senior citizens or empty nesters or whatever. And economics and gender give you clues about people, but you may meet a 16-year-old girl who's as serious a birder as a 70-year-old man. And they've got nothing in common demographically. One may come from wealth and another one from poverty, but their interests are the same, and their passion is similar. There was a study done called Why Zoos Matter, and researchers who did it were very experienced park, zoo, museum, nature center, tour company, aquarium kind of researchers. And this is the categories they came up with. And they pointed out that a lot of people are experience seekers. They are collecting experiences. They're kind of checklisters. they took the cruise boat because it hits 4 islands. You know, it takes them a lot of places. And they sign up for a bunch of ground activities when they get there because it takes them a lot of new places. I was in China once and sat on a plane next to a guy who was organizing his photos. And he had hundreds of photos of him from the waist up in front of different places. The waterfall, the animal, you know, the panda, and on and on and on. And that's a typical experience seeker kind of thing. And the selfie thing, ideally, you don't do that with your back to the ocean or at Grand Canyon on the edge, or you end up with a Darwin Award. But a lot of people are doing that. They're getting their photos of unique places and they're sharing that back with their family. I sat at a meeting in Grand Canyon once with a bunch of park rangers with Park Service, and somebody said, "I'm really sick of these people that come here and get off the bus and take a picture and get back on the bus and leave. They get no understanding of the canyon. That's stupid." And I said, "Well, why is that stupid?" And they said, "Well, because they don't bother to spend any time here and get in-depth knowledge of the canyon, and like their interest isn't as valid as mine in some way." And yet there's, I don't know what there is now at Grand Canyon, 4 or 5 million a year stopping that way. There's only a few thousand that go down Bright Angel Trail or Desert View Trail to the bottom. If they were the only ones interested in national parks, we would either flood that entire canyon or we'd strip mine the entire thing. We need 4 million advocates a year for Grand Canyon because they're now talking about uranium mining permits for the buffer zone around the park. We need people at all their different levels of interest. This is not a bad level of interest. It's just where people are at. Very often, that's people here. You know, they're just getting started with their interest in a place. And oh, by the way, can you be at different locations on different topics?
Most people are.
Yeah. I used to have a buddy that was a ardent rock climber, and he was one of those technical rock climbers that was, in fact, I forget, he lived in Oregon for a number of years, and he was one of the people that would walk a slack line across a 500-foot deep canyon with no tether. I mean, he was a really skilled climber and stuff. And I found it interesting that he would school other people on not damaging the rock you climb on and good stewardship behavior at these climbing locations. And yet I would catch him in our nature preserve at the state park I was a ranger at, and I said, there are plants on this wall of this bluff that this is the only place in the world they're found. They're endemic to here and there aren't many of them left. And you're climbing on this like if I scrape off another fern or two, no big deal. He had no appreciation. You can be at this level or even lower on one subject and up here on another. Stewardship isn't a pass into taking good care of the world everywhere. It's kind of where our awareness lies. Let me go back to my list. Explorer is that person that wants to go deeper. They're maybe aware, or even the next stage, they're beginning to understand and they really want to get in depth. On the birding tours, do you tend to get novice or experienced or all of the above? Yeah, and explorers are usually people who will take a behind-the-scenes tour, or they'll take a longer tour, or they'll come back for a second one, but they want to go deep. There's another category down here we call professional or hobbyist, and that's you or me. That's when you go on somebody's tour, and you're not just analyzing, you're not just listening to what they say, you're analyzing how they say it, whether they're as good as you or not. Yeah, and you steal ideas, that's right. And so, and these people want to go behind the scenes very often. They want to meet the boss, or they want to ask those operational questions about how do you book these, what software are you using. They go deeper. We were up at Alaska Sealife Center in Seward, Alaska, and the director of interpretation there told us, he said, our researchers don't want us to take people behind the scenes. He said, yet that's one of the most popular tours for kind of these two categories. And he said, what can we do? And we talked about it a while. One of the things we've always suggested to people is if you're doing something like that and you have a membership form or a donation form that you can color code in some way as to where it came from, the exact program location, do that. And he started doing that, and he could show them that they were getting sizable donations from people who took the behind-the-scenes tour. And he said they quit grousing about us traipsing through with a bunch of people to show them something. Have you been to the Alaska Sealife Center? This is where that Exxon Valdez money went. This was some of the mitigation money that they had to spend to do something good, to do marine animal rescue and interpretation of Seward.
I have been there.
Have you?
As a kid, yeah. I went to a big marine thing in Seward. So
Yeah, it's really neat. They've got puffins on a kind of artificial rock thing, and they've got a lot of seals and walrus and all that sort of stuff. It's really a neat place, but the money came from the damage done to the waters up there. Facilitator, who is that? Who do you think that would be?
Mom and Dad have already been here and come back the second time because we just have to show the kids.
Yep. Grandparents, good buddies, friend, somebody who they brought their lifelong best friend forever, and they want to share something very special with them. Yeah, and very often they don't. It's not about them. They're not as concerned about what experience they have. They want to make sure that whoever they're doing this for has that special experience. What's a spiritual recharger?
My favorite.
What do they want?
They want to go deep from the minute they get in the van because they are looking to, I don't know, connect dots or heal something, or, you know, they have a very focused purpose for being in the van that day.
The Why Zoos Matter people said spiritual rechargers very often don't want to know much information or don't want to, aren't having, the experience for them is kind of the gestalt, the whole thing.
Things you can't speak or touch.
Yeah. They're trying to absorb where they are and what they're doing and how special it is. And so, what can you do for them?
Facilitate.
Sometimes they just want a little time on their own to get their own impression of the place. I see people sometimes try to wander off from my group, and I just try to keep an eye on them and not overpower them. And ask them, you know, what were you doing over there? What was that about? A lot of people are just coming that they're remembering someone who maybe couldn't make the trip. I've had that experience quite often, especially with cruise ship passengers. If I find someone traveling alone, quite often they had booked it for a couple, and one of them didn't survive to make the trip. And now they've gone on, and they're not really so much in touch with the tour as they're thinking about the person who didn't make the trip with them.
I remember being in Yosemite on a particularly difficult hike up to a high waterfall, and the guide, the National Park Service ranger, when they got us there, said, this is a very special place. He says, a lot of people find it a very spiritual place to be here. You know that John Muir walked here, and a lot of presidents and royalty from Europe have come here and taken this hike. I want to give you about 30 minutes and let you just do what you want to do, and we'll meet back here and gave us some parameters of where not to go and what not to do, but did just exactly that. Decided that we needed it not just to be a rigorous hike up the hill and then a rigorous trot back down the hill, but give the spiritual rechargers a chance to do that. This is a psychographic approach to market segmentation. I mean, we talk about demographics, kind of marital status, socioeconomic status, age, that age groups, that sort of thing. We talk about geographics, where are they from, how far did they travel, urban or rural dwellers, that sort of thing. This is psychographics. This is what are they interested in? And they'll cross all sorts of those other lines because people are interested in things and they'll share that interest with someone else who is very different from them demographically, geographically, but they have a similar background.